Good morning, Blue Point and Bayport. Welcome to this year's Summer Solstice Walking Tour. My name is Frank Giebfried. I'm with the Bayport-Blue Point Heritage Association, and I'll be your guide for today. We're going to start at the foot of Blue Point Avenue at the dock located right behind me here, obviously. We're going to walk north, and we'll stop at various sites along the way, explaining their history and interesting stories. We'll stop at the library, and then we'll make one more turnaround stop and stop at a very special house. I'd like to thank Wendy Bennett from the library for putting this video together. And of course, I'd like to thank Gene Horton, who really developed all of these tours and gave so much to the community. As you probably know, Gene passed away last September, and he wanted these tours to continue after he was gone. So it's my pleasure and honor to serve as your guide for Gene today, although I won't do as good a job. So let's get started, and I'll see you at the first stop. The first stop on our tour is the original site of Avery's 5 Mile Look Hotel. The remains of the old decorative wall can still be seen today. The 5 Mile Look was opened in 1913 by Mrs. Matilda Avery of Blue Point. The hotel had 40 guest rooms, and its spacious dining porch was beautifully decorated as an arbor shelter complete with artificial vines and grapes overhead. At first, no regular summer visitors were allowed here. She only took in male guests. Unlike other hotels and boarding houses in Blue Point, Mrs. Avery announced that the 5 Mile Look would open in early May and run through the end of October. The menu at 5 Mile Look advertised Blue Point oysters at Blue Point. Unfortunately, in April 1939, the 5 Mile Look burned down in a late night fire. As we walk across the street, we're walking toward what would have been the original entrance for pedestrians. As you walk through this gate, the hotel would have been right behind it. So as you walked from the train station north of here, you would have walked down this sidewalk, come over and walked in. Down further, we can't see because it's overgrown with vines, would have been the entrance for automobiles. You would have pulled up around front, checked in, and then parked your automobile in a garage around back. This property now is protected land that belongs to the DEC. As we leave the former site of Avery's 5 Mile Look, we cross Blue Point Avenue and come over to Grandview Drive and take a look at this interesting building. This building was at one time the original kitchen and then laundry of the McGill home. The McGill home is north of here, and we'll be taking a visit there soon. In 1897, it was moved to the rear of the McGill property. Around 1914, it was moved to the foot of Blue Point Avenue, where it was used as a beach house by the McGills. During World War II, the building was taken over by the U.S. Army. The year 1943 was scratched into one of the windows and is still there today. It was used as an observation post with soldiers stationed here for about 6 months. Having been sold by the McGill family, this building today is a private home. As we walk north from the Great South Bay, we come to our first home, the McGill House. In 1890, Edward McGill of Brooklyn purchased a tract of land from Jacob Avery and built this house for his family. This summer home was built in 3 separate sections. The McGills called their estate Ferndale, and it stretched from Middle Road down to the bay on the east side of Blue Point Avenue. The contractor for the home was Philip Rich, whose beautiful house on Middle Road was featured in last year's Solstice Walk. The beach house that we saw in the bay was located at the rear of the house and served as the summer kitchen for the estate. The main reason for summer kitchens was to keep the heat, smoky smells, and risk of fire away from the main house. Just to the north of the McGill house is McGill's Lake, also known as McGill's Pond. In 1894, Mr. McGill used a freshwater spring on his property as a source of water for the pond that he had dug out. There were 2 small islands connected by rustic bridges, as well as a gazebo at the south end of the pond. The Purple Martin House, or Bird Hotel, built on the center island in October of 1894, is long gone. Fortunately, the birdhouse you see up ahead was modeled on the McGill home and made and given to the current owners by a skilled and generous neighbor. Today, the pond is maintained by the town of Brookhaven. Located on the corner of Blue Point Avenue and Middle Road, this was the site of the South Bay House, built in 1897 by Joseph and Mary Sanger. It was one of the largest summer boarding houses in this area. able to accommodate over 300 guests. The South Bay House was 4 stories high and had over 400 feet of shaded porches. In the evenings, you could enjoy dinner and dancing to the sounds of a live orchestra. The hotel was enlarged several times, with a large wing facing Blue Point Avenue added in 1913. That would have been down here. In total, there were 97 rooms and several cottages and outbuildings on the grounds. With just a quick walk to the bay and nightly dining and entertainment, the South Bay House was the center of social life in the Blue Point summer community. After the building burned down in 1930, the Ursuline nuns purchased the property in 1935, converting the Sanger's house into their convent. Unfortunately, due to arson, that building burned down in 1980. However, the building you see here was finished in 1982, and the nuns continued their residence until they sold the property to the Bayport-Blue Point Library a couple of years ago. As I'm sure you know, this beautiful building will be preserved and repurposed when our new library opens here, hopefully in the fall of 2021. Hope to see you there. This beautiful home was built in 1884 for Augustus PALOW and his family. Mr. PALOW was a tongs manufacturer who also worked the bay. Unfortunately, 4 of the PALOW children died very young. They're buried in the family plot at Blue Point Cemetery alongside their mother, who passed away in 1900. This must have been too great a strain on Mr. PALOW, as he took his own life just 1 year later by drowning beneath the ice that covered the bay that winter. Shortly thereafter, this became the residence of Roscoe Moore, better known to Blue Pointers as Rocky Moore. He ran his general store up the street in what is now the Firehouse Deli. Mr. Moore and his wife, Frances Daines Moore, had 2 sons, Weldon and Russell. They lived in this house until 1920, when it was sold to Thomas Knapp. Right next to the Rocky and Frances Moore home is the house that Frances grew up in. The house was built in 1876 for her parents, Bay Captain John Daines and Ida Mosier, who married in 1875. While the house was being built, the young married couple lived in the barn at the rear of the property. John Daines worked the bay and led gunning and hunting parties. He was widely respected and had great influence in this area. Mr. Daines passed away in 1913, and Mrs. Daines would go on to outlive her husband by 46 years, dying in 1949. They are both buried at Blue Point Cemetery. The Daines had 3 daughters, Frances, who we've already met, Layla, and Jessie. Interestingly, Jessie went on to marry Thomas Knapp, who bought the house next door from Rocky and her sister, Frances Moore. We'll revisit this house at the end of our tour. Imagine it's 100 years ago and you've just spent your last day of vacation swimming in the Great South Bay. You've gone back to your room with a 5-mile look, packed your bags, and you've checked out. As you walk up Blue Point Avenue to the train station, you decide you're hungry and you'd like to have a bite to eat. You might have stopped at this little bungalow, which was built in 1927. It was here that Joseph Lanson ran his restaurant, Joe's Step Inn. Joe served clam chowder, steaks, salads, chops, and sandwiches of every kind. But hurry up, you gotta catch your train. So finish that liverwurst and onion sandwich, and I'll see you downtown. Built in 1854 for Nelson Daines, this is one of the oldest homes in Blue Point. 2 streets in town are named for Nelson Daines. Yes, that's right, Daines Street and Nelson Avenue. Mr. Daines was a landholder, farmer, and bayman. In 1834, at the age of 23, he married Eliza Smith. They had 7 children, but in 1848, Eliza left the family to join the Shakers in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Fortunately, Mr. Daines was remarried to Annie Caroline Hulse in the early 1850s. Annie gave birth to their son John Daines, whose house we visited earlier. After Nelson Daines passed away in 1885, his son, Bay Captain Thomas Daines, lived here with his mother, who passed away in 1897 at the age of 83. Our next stop will be yet another Daines house. This spectacularly preserved house was built in the mid-1870s for William Augustus Daines, a Civil War veteran. It is an excellent example of a 19th century Victorian bayman's house, and also a model of how to preserve a historic home. More recently, this was the home and office of Dr. Jacob Breyer, who came to Blue Point in 1937 and served this area until 1963. He charged $2 for an office visit. If you wanted a home visit, that would set you back $3. I'm not sure how much the copay was, but I heard it was pretty steep. Our Lady of the Snow Church was built in 1917 at a cost of $6,600. The building was designed by well-known local architect Isaac Green, who lived in Sayville. Green designed many local churches as well as estates for the wealthy, including the beautifully preserved Meadowcroft, the summer residence of John Ellis Roosevelt and his family. In 1935, the church was raised by the Davis brothers of Blue Point, so a full basement could be added. This gave the parish a much-needed meeting room. The rectory, located just to the north of the church, was completed in 1921, and the statue of Our Lady of the Snow was added and dedicated in 1928. If you'd like more information about Our Lady of the Snow, the library has a copy of Gene Horton's book, The History of Our Lady of the Snow. Check it out. I heard it's pretty good. Designed by architect Albert Humble of New York City, this stately brick church replaced the 1865 wooden Baptist church that was located just south of the Blue Point Elementary School. The wooden church was sold in 1931 and moved to the mouth of Corey Creek, where it served as a yacht club until it burned down just 3 years later. The cornerstone of this church was laid in 1930, and the church was dedicated on June 28, 1931. The steeple rises to a height of 75 feet, where the bell is engraved to the memory of Deacon Wilfred Horton, who died in 1926. The Blue Point Baptist Church officially changed its name in 1994 to the Blue Point Bible Church. As we make our way toward the heart of downtown Blue Point, we come across the home of Dr. George Clemence and his wife Callista. Their son Ezra fought in the Civil War and is buried in Blue Point Cemetery. Dr. Clemence was a well-regarded veterinary surgeon in the 19th century. In 1872, during the epizootic epidemic in New York City, he won great renown for his success in handling the distemper outbreak. Sadly, Dr. Clemence passed away on October 11, 1895, while shucking corn on what is now the enclosed porch. He's buried at, can you guess? Well, you're wrong this time. He's buried at Rice Cemetery at the head of the Patchogue River. After his death, this house seems to have changed ownership every decade or so. In the 1940s, the Julian family lived here and opened an Italian restaurant known for its spaghetti. Today, it's a commercial building that was thankfully recycled instead of being torn down, helping to preserve a bit of Blue Point history. In the early 1900s, this was the heart of downtown Blue Point. Built in 1891, the right side of this building was the truck house for the Blue Point Hook and Ladder Company, which was formed the previous year. The bell that once hung in the belfry was cast in 1896 and is preserved across the street at the current Blue Point Fire Department. The left side of the building housed Rocky Moore's General Store. Mr. Moore's store was originally located in Patchogue. In fact, when he moved to Blue Point, he took his original wood sign with him to this new location. The post office was located here, as well as a telephone exchange. So if you wanted to make a phone call, this is where you came. Mr. Moore passed away in 1940, and Bob Brown bought the store and opened Bob Brown's Groceries. Also serving as fire commissioner for the fire department, Mr. Brown closed his store when he retired in 1971. He died 10 years later at the age of 75. Previously located in Rocky Moore's store, the Blue Point Post Office got a new home in 1917 when this building was finished. During that year, John Cullen was appointed the postmaster, earning a salary of $1,000. This building was a real gathering place for the community, as Blue Pointers had to go to the post office to pick up their mail until 1953. Just imagine all the gossip we've missed since home delivery began. After the post office moved up the road a bit to where the Salvation Army is now, Jimmy Cardamone opened a barbershop here, which was followed by Don's Barbershop from 1963 to 1967. Although now closed, the hairstyling tradition of the building continued when Monty Montesi and his wife Pat opened Jams, the hair place, in 1980. Our last official stop finds us at the present-day Bayport-Blue Point Library. On the lawn in front of the library would have stood the house of Scottish immigrant John Bennett and his family. It was here in 1898 that Mr. Bennett opened his florist and greenhouse business. Along with his son William, He developed extensive greenhouses with over 50,000 square feet under glass. The Bennetts specialized in growing carnations, ferns, lilies, and geraniums, shipping most of their product to New York City. John Bennett died in 1930 and is buried, yes, in the Blue Point Cemetery, right behind the building. In 1946, the library bought this property for $1,000 and used the old Bennett house as the Blue Point Library. The house was dismantled when our current library, which we're looking at right here, was dedicated in 1957. But traces of the Bennett ownership are still visible in the old greenhouse wall that can be seen in the back between the library parking lot and the cemetery. We'll end our tour here at a house we visited earlier. Although this house was built for John Danes and his family, local residents know this better as Gene Horton's house. Gene always joked that he was born in a little place on western Long Island called Brooklyn. His family connection to Blue Point goes back to his grandparents, who honeymooned at the Warner house right up the road here. Gene's family moved here when he was a young boy, and he later graduated from Seton Hall High School in Patchogue. After graduating from Providence College, Gene spent 33 years teaching social studies in East Mauritius. Over the years, Gene shared his passion for local history by publishing 6 books about Blue Point. He was active in many historical societies, giving entertaining presentations for organizations throughout Long Island. He also received numerous honors. Gene was an honorary member of the Blue Point Fire Department. In 1995, he was chosen by the Chamber of Commerce to be the Grand Marshal of our annual St. Patrick's Day Parade. The local history room at the library is named in his honor, as well as the annual history scholarship that's awarded by the Bayport-Blue Point Heritage Association. We'd like to thank Gene's husband, Eric, for being such a wonderful friend to the Heritage and Library. Eric has given all of Gene's papers, documents, records, and photographs to the library for preservation and study. He has also donated Gene's books to the Heritage, not to mention numerous artifacts of his own. And so, we'll end our tour this year at Gene's house. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do this in person. I'll leave you with one of Gene's favorite quotes. "To preserve our past is to enrich our future." Thanks, Gene, for enriching our lives with your knowledge, wisdom, and friendship.